Welcome to Below the Line with Dr. Bennie Harris. The Chancellor of the University of South Carolina Upstate talks with top leaders about issues such as change, technology, education, and leadership. Please enjoy.
So Glenn, welcome to Below the Line. Thank you so very much for taking the time to sit and talk with me. This has been a long coming. I wanted to talk to you a little more about your experience for a while, and so we finally got you here. I am here today with Air Force Major General, retired Major General, T. Glenn Davis. Glenn is the inaugural Executive Director for the USC Upstate, recently established National Security and Government Institute, and he hit the ground running. And so we're going to just start from the beginning, if that's okay.
Yes, sir.
Can you tell me a little about where you grew up and about your upbringing, what it was like, and what drew you to your career in the military and beyond?
Sure.
That's a lot of questions, but
Right. I got you. Well, it's a thrill to be here. I hail from South Carolina. I grew up in Columbia. Both my parents are from South Carolina, and so I'm a product of the South Carolina education system. Graduated from high school, went off to the University of South Carolina down in Columbia,
okay.
and I have to confess, I was originally headed to Duke on a pre-med scholarship, and at the last minute, we decided to go to Carolina. So I didn't have a scholarship to go to Carolina, and so looking for monies, the Air Force ROTC was an opportunity to get a quick scholarship, and that's how I landed in the military.
Okay.
It wasn't because I had a grand design to go do that. My mom worked several jobs to help us get through school. My dad worked another couple of jobs, and so it wasn't like we just had money laying around to go to college. And even on top of that, I worked 2 or 3 jobs the whole time going to college to get through the program.
Okay.
So that's the background there.
Great. So coming back to South Carolina was like a coming home after a very illustrious military career. So after leaving the military, you served as the director of Pratt & Whitney, F-22, F-35, and C-17 sustainment operation in Oklahoma City, where you oversaw the critical repair of the world's most advanced stealth engines. From there, you went on to work as the chief operating officer for United Dynamics Aerospace and Defense, where you secured more than $41 million in funding to perform critical obsolescence reverse engineering for the Department of Defense. What were some of those most important lessons you learned about leadership and life during those 2 appointments? First of all, I think I chopped all those appointments up because they were very, very elaborate. And so I would love to learn more about that and then learn about those lessons that you learned at the same time.
Sure. So I spent a quick 37 years in the Air Force. I went in as a lieutenant, and I was fortunate enough to get to do a wide variety of combat assignments, mostly with fighter aircraft. They won't let you do that forever, and so I broadened into becoming a logistics officer. I eventually became the director of logistics for Air Force Materiel Command, which is the predominant command for overhauling and fixing the aircraft. So I was responsible for 5,500 aircraft.
Okay.
I had the single largest budget in the Air Force, which was $14 billion.
Wow.
And so we were responsible for executing that $14 billion budget down to the penny every year. And then I concluded by being the deputy director of logistics for the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff up at the Pentagon. And so you tend to think after 37 years, you know something about how to run a budget, how to take care of people. I think at one point I had 76,000 people working for me. And so when I transitioned to work for Pratt & Whitney, a huge powerhouse company, I thought, I got this in the bag, piece of cake. In fact, I remember when I got to Oklahoma City, they said, well, you're only going to have about 600 people initially working for you, and your budget or your revenue per year is around $225 million. And I thought, easy peasy, you know, that's nothing compared to $14 billion. Well, little did I know what I was walking into, because we didn't have the luxury of the organization, the processes, and I will tell you one thing: it is far different spending $14 billion than earning $225 million.
Yep.
So I tell all of my good friends in the military now who have these enormous budgets, I tell them, go earn that amount, because it's vastly different. And then transitioning to running a small aerospace and defense company was even a greater change. The company I ran was only about 55 employees, and it was about a $20 million a year company. But I would say it was equally challenging as being in the Air Force or working for Pratt & Whitney. And I think the most profound thing for me was just walking down the hallways. When I walked down the hallway in a combat fighter unit, all I could think about were the moms and dads and taxpayers. When I went off to war, am I going to bring back all my jets? Are all my people going to be safe?
Okay.
And have I been a good steward of taxpayers' money? When I'm working for Pratt & Whitney, or even better yet, working for the small business, I'd walk down the hallways, and the young people that work for us, the laborers, they would look at me and they go, "Hey, Glenn, how's it going?" Well, they weren't really worried about how I was doing. They wanted to know, "Glenn, are you bringing in the business so that I can put braces on my kids' teeth and so that I can buy groceries?"
Right, yeah.
And so the pressure was about the same, but it was coming from two totally different directions. It was kind of daunting to look young people in the eye and go, "Man, I am responsible for your livelihood."
Yeah.
So
Much more accessible to that group. The smaller it gets, it becomes even more personal. You have so much experience and so many experiences that I know are very exciting that we probably can't talk about because in the role that you had, there's a lot of confidentiality there and secrets. But what are some of the leadership lessons you learned along the way, working for where you had such a large budget to a $250 million budget to $20 million budget?
Right.
What are the leadership lessons in those organizations?
Well, I think whether you have a small budget or a huge budget, the tools that you use to decide who gets money and who doesn't, and how you spend money and how you don't, are equally challenging. I remember when I was in the Air Force, I was responsible for the budget on those 5,500 aircraft, and I had to decide what was the priority. And so you might imagine the fighter aircraft community would come to me, the bombers would come to me, the air refuelers, trainer, all of the communities would come to me and say, "General Davis, we're the priority. You can't win a war without the fighters." Well, the trainers would say, "You can't train the fighters without the trainers. You can't get to the war without the air refuelers." And so we had to build a process by which we didn't necessarily prioritize who was the most important aircraft. We decided how to make them whole. And so we started looking at it differently. Instead of rewarding them on how important their aircraft was, I would assess their ability to go do their combat mission. And if they were at 60% and someone else was at 40%, then I would fund up the 40% unit.
Okay.
And we would try to bring them up to a parity of maybe 80% across all of the platforms. And so I found that a lot of the traditional leadership, that wasn't enough. You had to really get creative. And you know, the people that are in the military today are all volunteers. They're not drafted anymore. And so they have made a choice to be there, and they're pretty smart. And so to lead that kind of group of people, you got to be on your toes. So it was interesting trying to find collaborative approaches.
Okay. Which is interesting, I think, and leadership is something that we talk a lot about. I think we understate the value of it, understate the importance of it. And while there are a lot of books about leadership, the script really is a lived script. You have to learn from the environment you're in. You have to pivot. There are some things that are consistent. And so you're from Columbia, as you talked about earlier. You're an alumnus of the University of South Carolina, but you spend most of your career elsewhere.
Right.
Can you tell me about where you've been and what led you to essentially come home?
Sure. Yeah, so like I mentioned before, I graduated from college, ROTC, in 1984, and I was off to the races. Went off to technical training, went to my first assignment. And one of the things I love about the Air Force, if you can just imagine, my first assignment, 21 years old, the Air Force gave me 310 people working for me and about a $14 million budget and 27 F-4 Phantom aircraft.
Okay.
And I was responsible for deploying those assets all around the world at 21 years old. Pretty daunting. And so over the course of the next 37 years, I got to visit at least 30 countries. I deployed 4 times. I was stationed in Germany when the Berlin Wall came down. I was stationed overseas during Desert Storm, Desert Shield. Mm-hmm. Deployed another 3 or 4 times after that. I was proud to be in the very first F-16. The day after 9/11, I deployed to Kuwait, and my unit was the very first ones dropping bombs on Afghanistan the day after 9/11. And so I think those locations are pretty cool. I love being at the unit level, but they won't let you do that forever. Mm-hmm. And so, I spent time at the headquarters. I spent time in the Pentagon. But I'll tell you the other thing that the Air Force rewarded me with that I would have never guessed. Education is not, it's a must. You come in the Air Force as an officer with a bachelor's degree, the first thing they say is, when are you going to have your master's? Mm-hmm. I'll never forget, midway through my career, I was coming off of a combat assignment. I'm talking to the person who gives you assignments, and I said, hey, what combat unit am I going to next? And he goes, well, you're going to a combat unit you wouldn't expect. You're going to go work in the Senate, and you're going to be
a combat unit.
Right. Right.
Maybe a good example.
Right. He said, you're going to be working in the U.S. Senate on the Armed Services Committee as an Air Force representative, and while you're there, you've got to do a master's equivalent at Georgetown University. And I was like, oh, dear Lord, right? Mm-hmm. So I wasn't expecting that. So I finished that tour, which was magnificent, went out and did the 9/11 combat assignment for a year, came back, the same thing happened. Yeah, you're going to a different kind of combat unit. So they selected me to go to Harvard, to the Kennedy School of Government for a year. Mm-hmm. And that was another incredibly rewarding experience because I got to see all facets of life. And I'll never forget talking to my commander before I went up there, and I said, sir, I don't know that I'm the brightest, smartest kid on the street, and I'm a little leery about going to Harvard because I don't want to embarrass my mama or the Air Force. And this commander of mine was my absolute favorite in my entire career, and he said, look, knucklehead, I'm not sending you to Harvard to learn anything. I'm sending you to Harvard to expose some of the most brilliant minds to what we do in the Department of Defense. And I said, well, is that all I got to do? And he said, yes. Well, it lifted a huge burden off of me, and so I went up there, enjoyed it, and I did absolutely fine with the academics. But, sometimes you got to think outside the box, and I'm glad he prepared me.
Yeah. Well, I'm not surprised that you did very well. And me getting to know you academically as well. So we at USC Upstate are thrilled that you're serving as the executive director of our new National Center and Government Institute. Your vision for the Institute has been described as inspiring, as ambitious, with plans to provide our students with some of the most phenomenal experiences, unparalleled exposure to national and world leaders, creating an environment that fosters the growth of informed and effective leaders for the future. And even in some of your inaugural programs, we got a chance to see some of those exceptional leaders, not just our students being exposed, but our faculty, staff, and the community. Can you tell me more about these goals and your plans for achieving them?
Sure. As I mentioned before, this South Carolina kid got to go to both Georgetown and to Harvard thanks to the U.S. Air Force. Well, not every kid in South Carolina is going to have a chance to go to those institutions. And so I think when you and I initially talked, the vision was to bring the very goodness of those two institutions to the upstate. And the things that we're talking about are an array of short courses that you can't get anywhere else, like perhaps a course on what's the difference between the House and the Senate, but not necessarily taught from an academics point of view. We bring actual staff and House staffers here to talk through that. Our goal is that would lead to a certificate program, maybe. The other thing that I think would be beneficial is a speaker series where we have enlightened speakers from all corners of the world come in and share what they know. One of the very first people we plan to bring on board is Ambassador Kelly Curry.
Right.
She's a former ambassador to the UN, and she has every ambassador on Earth on speed dial. And they are prepared to come in and do guest speaker spots for us. So that's kind of one side of the institute. The other side is supporting academic rigor as it applies to national security and government. So the one area that I was very fortunate that you surfaced with me was cybersecurity.
Right.
And I was delighted because we have a contact at the Pentagon, the director of cyber warfare himself. They are very interested in working with the Congress to fund programs that will grow our program and help our nation reach its hiring goals. In South Carolina right now, we are 5,020 cybersecurity jobs vacant. So there should not be competition between Upstate, Clemson, Wofford. We should be pulling together as a team because we can't produce enough by ourselves if we're producing at full throttle. So what we want to do is create a climate where we can reach those goals.
Actually, what I was impressed by, what I appreciated, and learning about some of the defense space and cybersecurity need, et cetera, as a regional comprehensive university, we don't think about those partnerships with the Department of Defense. Most of the time, those things are thought about with major research universities. But it made so much sense when we talked about it, and then in talking with the people that you brought for us to engage with, it made even more sense to see boots on the ground that USC Upstate is a phenomenal and is an appropriate entity to be in partnership with the Department of Defense in this particular space.
Sure.
So
absolutely.
So last year, you and your wife, Teresa,
All right.
took a one-year sabbatical to, is it
Riyadh, right?
Saudi Arabia, to lead a major portion of the Saudi Vision 2030 transformation for the Ministry of Defense. Can you share a little about that experience and how you believe that it might impact your work and our work here at USC Upstate?
Absolutely. Yes. Talking about something coming in from left field.
I was afraid that you were going to come back. Not because of security issue. I'm like, it had to be so exciting there and so much great work. I'm going to get Glenn to come back and be a part of what we're doing here.
Right.
But go ahead.
Right. Well, let me tell you, it was quite a shocker. I was very humbled that retired 4-star General Jones, who was the former commandant of the Marine Corps, he was the supreme Allied commander in Europe, and then he finalized his government career by working as the National Security Advisor to President Obama.
Okay.
When he left office, the administration asked him to set up a company in Saudi Arabia to foster relationships. And as you may be aware, in 2016, the Crown Prince launched a new program called Saudi Vision 2030 that is one of the most transformative initiatives I have ever seen. If people think things are moving fast in America now, go to Saudi Arabia, and it will blow your mind.
Yeah.
So the Crown Prince is doing things like, he has essentially liberated women over the last 6 years.
Okay.
They don't have to wear all the gear anymore. They work. They've gone from 0 to 30% of the workforce. They drive. The industry, they have been an oil and gas country forever. They are expanding into everything to include aerospace and defense. They want to be a tourist attraction. They are even working to host, you won't believe this, the Winter Olympics in Saudi Arabia.
How are you going to get winter in the Olympics?
Well, they've got enough money, they can blow snow. So I think many people have seen the Burj Khalifa building in Dubai. It's the tallest building in the world. Well, Saudi Arabia is building one twice that big. It's just astronomical. So General Jones asked me to come over and run the most contentious part of the military piece, which is a decision they made to combine their Air Force with their Air Defense Force. So when you think air defense, many people have heard of Patriot missiles, and those are missiles that can knock down enemy aircraft or enemy weapon systems. And many people go, well, why would you want to combine those two, the Air Force and Air Defense? Well, just a quick vignette. All you have to do is look at Ukraine. The United States Air Force, or the United States, sold Ukraine brand new F-16s, trained their pilots. They sold them Patriot missiles, and within just a couple of months, they shot one of their own pilots down. So if those systems aren't integrated, it just doesn't work.
Okay.
And so, so I spent a year over there taking the equivalent of the United States Army and the United States Air Force and smashing them together to become one service. And you can imagine trying to combine their heritage, uniforms, language, systems, weapon systems, bases. And you can imagine going from two sets of leadership to one set of, so some people were getting pink slips. So it was quite challenging. But the piece that I think will affect USC Upstate is one of the very ambitious goals that the Prince set. And what it is in today's Saudi Arabia, they only produce 10% of the materials that go into weapon systems. The Crown Prince set a goal of 50% by 2030.
That's quick.
That's right around the corner. Well, I can tell you, having been in that world all my life, you cannot get there using normal means. So the way he plans to get there is he is going to start sending droves of Saudi citizens and military to the United States for training. Then he wants to form partnerships with American companies. He wants to bring them to Saudi, and whenever the government or whenever the civilian companies are willing, he will annex them. And so rather than growing the capability organically, he has thoughts of simply buying it. And that's how he plans to go from 10 to 50 as quick as he does. Wow. So my goal is to make sure that, you may have heard, he promised the current president $1 trillion over the next 4 years. Well, my goal is to make sure Upstate gets at least its fair share of that. So we'll.
What would a fair share be? Well, you don't have to state that.
That's right. That's right. So that's how it could affect us.
Excellent. Interesting. What are some key observations about Saudi Arabia and the Middle East after spending a year in that part of the world? Right. I know you've spent time there before, but after spending a year in that part of the world.
Well, I think the short answer would be, number one, if you haven't had a chance to visit the Middle East, you should go, because I think it will blow your mind on a couple of fronts. When we got ready to go over there, most of our family and friends were like, Glenn and Teresa, Godspeed, please be careful, don't get yourself killed over there. I'm embarrassed to say this, but while we were in Saudi Arabia, I don't know that I've ever felt more safe. You can walk down the streets, it's completely safe. There are no gangs, no drugs, no abuse of alcohol. They are incredibly advanced electronically. I can remember the first time I presented a credit card and they laughed at me. What do you mean you're not using Apple Pay? You don't know how to do that? And the worst shopping mall over there is like Rodeo Drive. Louis Vuitton everywhere. It's just opulent. And so I think it is worth taking a look. The other thing that I think a lot of Americans should know about Saudi Arabia is we tend to think of global superpowers because the U.S. is one, China, Russia, the United States. But I will tell you that Saudi Arabia is a critical regional power. And the stability that they bring to the Middle East through their weapon systems and their relationships with the other countries allows Americans to get the oil resources that we get. If they weren't providing the stability, then we wouldn't have what we have. And so I think it's important to maintain that relationship.
So when you think about national interests, all those types of things are part of it.
Yes, sir.
So this whole podcast is about below the line, and it's about leadership. And and I can only imagine that in the military space, that you are constantly dealing with how to lead what you don't see, what is not above. People hold, I think it was, what's the country singer? Kenny, who says sometimes you got to hold them, I know what to fold them, those type of things.
Oh, that's right. Kenny Rogers, right.
What is Kenny's last name? But anyway,
Rogers, right.
Kenny Rogers, yeah. So how do you lead in that type of space where you don't always know what's really above the line? So you're leading below there. You're trying to figure out what the interests are of the people that you're leading. How do you do that?
Yeah.
And
Well,
what is your take on that perspective?
Well, I think it's always a challenge. When I first came in the Air Force, we would move about every 3 years, and then once they find out that you have capabilities, then you start moving even faster. There was a period in my career where I was moving every 18 months, and you could become characterized as the firefighter. There was goodness in that, and there was badness in it because your commander could call you up any day and go, "Hey, Glenn, this unit's failing. I need you to go in there and give it a course correction. You got 60 days. Go." And but I've also been in jobs where, like if you're in a staff job at the Pentagon, you're doing 10-year planning or 5-year planning, and so you can be much more deliberate. So I think if you had to sum it up, I try to call my leadership situational leadership. I can remember walking into a combat unit that was about to deploy, and only 7 of the 24 aircraft were ready to go. Well, we had to move quick, and it was a situation where I had to be completely authoritative. There was no questions. Here's how we're going to do it, ladies and gentlemen.
You had to stay focused and get it done because you have
but there were other times where I was in the Pentagon and we were working on a 5-year budget, and I have to incorporate the Army, Navy, Marines, Coast Guard, State Department, all of those other organizations, and it had to be completely deliberative and collaborative the whole way. And so I think it just depends. But I think you got to be ready for either one.
Yeah.
And fortunately, I do believe that the Air Force provides you with remarkable training to be ready for either one.
So I understand that you enjoy gardening and
I
hiking and cycling. What about these activities that you like the most? What about it?
Well, I think the common denominator, if you can find one to those 3 things, gardening, hiking, and cycling, is they're all outside.
Okay.
Last week we had a cyber camp over in Greenville, and we had 9 or 10 young high school students attend. And one of the questions they asked me was, what's the most critical attribute of a future leader, you know, in cyber warfare or in the Air Force or in any job, right? And I think I stunned them by saying a suntan. And they were like, why a suntan? I said, well, you got to get out and experience life. For me, hiking and cycling, I'm a little ashamed. I am a kind of a type A driven person. When I'm on the bike,
I'm not surprised, you know.
I'm going as fast as I can go. Same thing on hiking. And I think the reason I like them is because I am just completely thinking about how much I'm suffering on the bike or on the hike, and nothing else gets in. The garden thing is something I love to do with my wife. She's on the board of one of the local garden clubs, and one of the things that attracted us to this area is that it is just simply so beautiful. And the last thing, you know, there's a little bit of competitiveness in it. I want our lawn and yard at home to look
The best.
at least even.
No,
with
the
whoever-
best. You want to look the best, right?
And so it's an opportunity to contribute to the community, but at the same time, there's a little competitiveness in there.
That's good.
Right.
I would be surprised if it wasn't. So is there a quote or mantra that resonates with you?
Yes. Since I was a kid, there was a poem that I've always been fond of, and it's Rudyard Kipling. And I'm sure you've heard of it. It's the good old "If" poem.
Okay.
And I tell you what, there were times in my career where there's one piece of that poem that talks about giving a distance run to the unforgiving minute.
Yeah.
And I can tell you, there were times where I wanted to hang up the spurs. Like, this is just too painful. But I would always think about that poem and go, you know, you can't give up. But the other part of that poem that I loved is the one where it talks about if you can immerse yourself in the crowds and not lose your virtue, but also walk with kings, but not lose the common touch. And I think those are very important when you're a leader. And so that's my favorite of all time.
That's beautiful. I can see that, especially as we reflect on your career and the places you've been, the people that you've met and engaged in. And if you can do all of that and not lose the common touch, and that's who you are.
Well, we try.
and
We're not
so-
perfect, right?
And I've watched you work with students at all levels in the organization and have tried to create opportunities and advocacy for them. So you still have the common touch.
Well, thank you.
I'm here with retired Major General Glenn T. Davis, 2-star general. I'm excited. Thank you so much for joining me on Below the Line.
It was
Thank
a
you,
privilege. Thank you, sir.
You're welcome.
The Below the Line podcast is brought to you by the University of South Carolina Upstate. Look for our monthly write-up in Greenville Business Magazine, and for more information, go to uscupstate.edu.